Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It is Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner, and Joey and I are about to fly out to Orlando, get ready for a week of Citrus Bowl coverage. But before we do that, we wanted to get on this podcast because we have plenty to talk about with Illinois football. We have so much to catch up on here with 6 transfer additions, Joey Wagner, so far for Illinois. And boy, they've had some big ones here recently. They've had 4 defensive linemen, a wide receiver, and a backup quarterback who has starting experience at the FBS level. We're awaiting decisions on Gabe Ackus and Xavier Scott, but also J.C. Davis could have another year of eligibility, or does if he wants it. And Zy Chrysler has another year of eligibility because of the Pavia case, and he has decided to enter the transfer portal. We'll talk about why that is not surprising for us. But, Joey, we got a lot to catch up on before we head to Orlando and talk all about this bowl game. There's a lot of roster stuff going on right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I remember actually being in Tampa 2 years ago, and roster stuff happened when we were in Tampa. So I think that we're not going to be totally out of the woods on roster building conversation, Jeremy, when we get to Orlando. But it's been a big week, I guess. It's quiet 10 days, and things start to really pick up here over the last 4 or 5. And Illinois retooled its defensive line, and I know we're going to get into that, Jeremy. That, to me, is the biggest story so far with the transfer portal.
Yeah, speaking of Tampa, I remember where I was when Luke Altmaier committed. We were at Hat-Tricks.
Yeah.
We were at Hat-Tricks. I think we were trying to get to Hat-Tricks news.
We were trying because we potted from the hotel. They had a nice little setup outside, and it was nice enough. And in fact, I think word started kind of picking up on our drive. We were probably somewhere in Atlanta when phones started going off, and it became clear that Luke Altmaier and Illinois were probably going to pair up. And that's turned out pretty well, Jeremy, for Illinois.
Yeah, that has. Remember, that's when some of the hirings were happening. So that's the weird part. Is like we are preparing to go. I sent you a list of stories last night on Christmas night. I'm just starting to think, I got to cover a lot of things in a couple of days, and a lot of this stuff is roster stuff. I want to ask the staff about who they're bringing in and what they are. Of course, we'll focus on the game, but it just feels like big picture, Joey. Like more of these roster additions are as important as the game we're about to cover.
Yeah, and not only new faces on the roster, but you think back to that ReliaQuest Bowl, and you see Matthew Bailey have moments, and you see, I remember we talked to Kenenna Odeluga after the game, and Xavier Scott had a big role with Devin Witherspoon. So not only new faces, but guys, Aaron Henry was in his first game as a defensive play caller. So it's not only new guys you've got to ask about, but kind of seeing maybe a jumping off point for some of these guys as they go into spring ball and what that could look like for Illinois, especially at wide receiver, which we're going to get into here.
All right, Joey, let's talk about it. You mentioned it. The big story so far is remaking this defensive front. When we talked about what the marquee additions would be, we talked about wide receiver, and we will talk about whether Justin Bowick is that marquee addition. We talked about offensive tackle, which it turns out the marquee addition might be your own player in J.C. Davis. But as we talked about then, the place where they need to add the most guys, the most quantity, was defensive line. And boy, they did not waste any time. They've added 3 Power 4 defensive line transfers. They've also added a third guy from Wisconsin, Leon Lowry Jr., an outside linebacker transfer. But boy, they are going to the Wisconsin well, whether it's the connection to Paul Christ or to Jim Leonard, who coached these guys, recruited some of these guys. James Thompson, Curt, Neal, both played for them. Leon Lowry obviously transfers there a year ago from Syracuse, did not have as productive of a year. And then they also had another Florida State transfer. He did not play with Dennis Briggs Jr., but Tomiwa Durajaye, hopefully I got that one right, is now in his 4th school in 4 years. He played at West Virginia and Kentucky before being at Florida State. It's the Wisconsin thing that stands out to you, isn't it, Joey? I mean, what do you make of
that? I make that Brett Bielema trusted the guys who recruited those Wisconsin players for the most part. And as you mentioned, Paul Christ and Jim Leonard. And before the coaching change in Madison, there's a reason you saw Illinois in high school recruiting battles for defensive front prospects. And there's a reason now that Brett Bielema goes and gets 3 starters from the Wisconsin Badgers on the defensive front. There's overlap there, right? There's overlap in terms of scheme, in terms of what they're looking for, skill set wise, in the building wise. And it makes sense that I would have to imagine Brett Bielema made some phone calls. I don't know that. I don't know if he would ever tell us that, but why wouldn't he have made calls to the guys?
We'll ask him tomorrow.
Yeah, the guys that he knows very well to add those players. So it is a story, right? And someone mentioned on our boards, but it kind of reminds me of Lovey going to USC and getting Wally Batiku and Trayvon Sidney and Joshi Madurebebe Austin Clark obviously was a connection there, Jeremy, when they did that. So maybe not as much of an in the building connection anymore, but definitely a Brett Bielema contacts list connection. I do wonder. I think they're not going to do it. Maybe. I don't know. I kind of joked with you when they got Leon Lowry, when all these guys get to campus, if they take a picture and like reporting is eligible for the 2025 season, just for Brett Bielema to do one more grand display, I guess, but with some of these guys and throw a little bit in Luke Fickell's face.
Yeah, we're going to have Nick Osen from Badger 24/7 later this podcast here in about 20 minutes to kind of break down what these guys are. But also, Wisconsin's such an interesting program right now. I mean, ever since Illinois beat them 2 years ago, that program has just been on a different trajectory. It's not as strong of a program. They made a huge hire, which I think on paper everyone loved, in Luke Fickell. But 2 years in, there are a lot of questions about where that's going to be. But they've lost a lot of talent and they've added a lot of talent. There's just been a lot of turnover. They have the number one transfer class in the Big Ten, but for my money, outside of Purdue, they seem to have lost as much talent as anybody in the Big Ten. So just a really interesting turnover happening there. But some of these guys that recruited under Jim Leonhard, Illinois' defense has some similarities. It's not the same as what Jim Leonhard ran, but they ran a 3-4, traditional 3-4. Illinois kind of runs more of a 5-2 kind of base front. But Mike Tressel, the former Cincinnati defense coordinator, and Luke Fickell run more of a 3-3-5, which is a different kind of scheme than what Illinois does. So it seemed pretty clear. Curt Neal has been on the record that he didn't love the scheme that they had. And they must look at Illinois and Terrence Jamison and now Clint Simpson and Brett Bielema and think that they can find another level. I'll tell you this, James Thompson is a huge addition. He missed last year because of a torn pec, only played in one game, so he got a medical red shirt for that year. But this is a 2-year starter, was really good, Joey. And when we talk about that 4-eye technique, which in that Illinois three-man defensive line is kind of lining up on the inside shade of the tackle. So traditional 3-4 defensive end. He is the prototypical guy. He's 6'5", 295 pounds, long, strong, pretty explosive. But when I look at him, I look at, that's a Keith Randolph type of player. And he's proven like that. Curt Neal is a nose tackle, undersized, 6 foot, 290 pounds. So he's not the biggest guy, but he's stout. He was a starter at defense at nose tackle for Wisconsin. So to add a Big Ten proven guy that you feel like you can unlock some potential with, and he has 2 years of eligibility, he really intrigues me to mix with Jeremiah Warren and Gentle Hunt and Eddie Turk. And I'm high in the future of Isaiah White, but that's a couple years away. And then Tomiwa Durajaye, like, he's really talented. You look at some of his high school film, 6'4", 280, really explosive. That's what stands out. For a guy his size, he doesn't move like that. He moves more like an edge guy. But you think of what Johnny Newton did in this defense, like, that's the kind of style he is. I'm not going to say he's Johnny Newton, but he kind of reminds me of Dennis Briggs. Only he's a third-year guy. He's played 3 years of college football as opposed to 6, but he's got 2 years of eligibility, Joey. So you've added definitely Thompson and Neal, I think, are starting caliber players. And you plug those gaps of losing T-Raw Edwards and Dennis Briggs Jr., and then you add Durajaye, who along with Alex Bray takes a step forward, Pat Farrell takes a step forward. You feel like you have a core here for a couple of years. Thompson's got 1 year, but all these other guys have multiple years where you feel like you have a decent rotation. And I feel like they plug these holes pretty well of Power 5 players who have a lot of experience here.
Yeah, and maybe not an insane amount of production, but Power 5 starters. And there's so much value in Power 4 starters, I guess now we should say, until the Pac-12 figures itself out. But there's a lot of value in Power 4 Big Ten starting defensive linemen, been in a Wisconsin weight room system, been in all of that, have bulked themselves up and are ready to come in and play. And then you trust Terrence Jamison. He has earned more than the benefit of the doubt at this point, right? To take these guys, like Denzel Daxon 2 years ago. We didn't think what kind of impact was Denzel Daxon did we think was going to make before he came in here? And
well, can I interrupt you just to say this? Like, this is why I'm excited about these guys, is because like Denzel Daxon and T-Raw Edwards are really unproven commodities, similar to Anichi Sledge. Now, Anichi Sledge didn't work out for Illinois. He's since transferred to FAU, but like these guys are more proven than those guys coming in, and Jamison got a lot out of them. Even a Dennis Briggs Jr., I thought had a lot of experience, but never really was a starter. Like James Thompson is a more proven player and commodity at the Big Ten level than Dennis Briggs even was coming in here. So that's what excites me here is you have that experience, you have a high floor already. Then what can Jameson and this defensive staff unlock? So sorry, Joe. I just want to.
No, I think that's a huge thing. And you mentioned Keith Randolph. If you can get the 2022 version of Keith Randolph before injuries really hampered his final season, that's a darn good football player and an NFL draft prospect. Like, that's what we were talking about Keith Randolph after 2022 is, are he and Johnny Newton coming back? What's the plan there? So, yeah, I mean, I think to reload with guys who are proven. I think if you zoom out a little bit, Jeremy, the defensive front these last 2 off seasons has just been, you've got to go aggressively get humans to come in here and play because you had those recruiting gaps. We've talked about that from basically 2020 to the 2022 class, I believe is when they really
21 and 22, because you did get Johnny Newton in 2020.
That's right, 21 and 22, and then there was really nothing there. So that was going to be a portal that you had to make up with that via the portal. So maybe this is an avenue. I'm not saying you would get out of the defensive front portaling process altogether, but maybe it doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, they've got to reload 2, 3 probable starters on that. And you can start getting to some of those developmental guys, getting to your Alex Brays, your Pat Farrells, your Jeremiah Warrens, Angela McCollum, Demetrius John, Eddie Turk, as you go on right down the line. And there's a lot of value in that, man, to get some bridge guys who, you think of a guy like Alex Pihlstrom at center, reminds me of kind of a similar thing, different story, obviously, but someone who can be productive for you and to put together a good season. You don't have to rush some of those younger guys in.
Listen, and I don't know if Thompson's going to be as disruptive as a Dennis Briggs Jr. or Durajaye, like right away, right? I don't know if they're going to match that production. I don't know if Curt Neal is going to be as good as T-Rod Edwards, but what I do feel is like these are serviceable to solid starters. I think James Thompson's a good one. He came into this year as an NFL prospect. Like, I don't know if drafted or undrafted, whatever it is, but he's a guy that can play at the NFL. Durajaye and Neal have good pedigrees here, right? What excites me is if those guys are serviceable starters, solid starters, you also should get some development and improvement from the second string. And that's where the weakness was up front, was some of these guys were just playing a little bit too early. Like Alex Bray, I thought really improved as the season went along, but it was clear he's probably a year away from strength-wise. Same thing with Pat Farrell. I think Jeremiah Warren strength-wise was there, and I thought he was solid in the rotation, but those guys should be better. So now all of a sudden, can you actually get a 6-man, 2 deep here, Joey, where you feel like Alex Bray is a starting caliber player and you mix him with Durajaye at that spot. Pat Farrell can play 200 or 300 snaps and be good behind James Thompson. Curt Neal and Jeremiah Warren and Gentle Hunt can combine for a really good nose tackle rotation. Maybe you can rotate those guys more. I think it could be a deeper defensive front. So I don't know if the starters are going to match what Edwards and Briggs were, because they were really good this past year. But I think that 2 deep as a whole can really improve.
Yeah, I'm with you. Those 2 defensive linemen, because of what Gabe Akis did, because of what some of your guys in the secondary did, I feel like Briggs and Edwards get a little bit overlooked for what they did. Edwards in particular, the pressures he generated from that position's not designed to get the pressures that he got. It's just that is a dirty work. Open the door for Johnny Newton, Dennis Briggs, Keith Randolph. Let them go get that production. And T-Rod Edwards got those pressures and was able to get back there.
What's interesting to me, Joey, though, is that Curt Neal kind of reminds me of T-Rod. He's a smaller but more disruptive guy. So Dax and Calvin Avery, these were huge dudes, right? Like, that just kind of clogged that middle. I wonder if they liked what T-Rod gave them from a disruption standpoint, that they're like, hey, we'll go a little smaller as long as, he really penetrates and disrupts that A-gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen, I think that's kind of been the interesting thing of watching this staff and the roster building over the last few years, is how they pivoted from maybe what we thought were the physical prototypes at certain positions and how that's kind of evolved. I think that's a great point. It's worth asking Terrence Jameson when we talk to him just about, how maybe T-Rod Edwards and the production, what they got from him in terms of disruption, maybe that did create a pivot in terms of what they were seeking out in the transfer portal and getting away from maybe an Anichi Sledge, who was more of that kind of eat up bodies and let those other guys go. That's a really good point, Jeremy. I'm curious what Terrence Jameson has to say.
No, I think you want to get stronger at those other spots, though, right? If you're going to go a little quicker on the interior, like I think a James Thompson is stronger. Alex Bray and Pat Farrell should get stronger as this thing goes along. I want to mention Leon Lowry, proven starter. He started the last 2 years, won at Syracuse, had a career high 7.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks 2 years ago. Goes to Wisconsin, wasn't as disruptive. So you wonder if that's a scheme thing. But you watch the film, and it kind of reminds me of an Alec Bryant, maybe with a little bit more burst. But I'm wondering what the scheme can unlock. But I think this was a raise the floor kind of addition. Because if you have Lowry and Alec Bryant, two guys who have played 5-6 years of college football, and you have them next to Gabe Akis, I feel really good about that outside linebacker group. Not to mention Joe Barna as a sophomore. Then you get some smaller, quicker options like JoJo Hayden and Daniel Brown. Now, if Leon Lowry and Alec Bryant are your two starters because Gabe Akis goes to the NFL, then I think you're just more solid. I'm not as, maybe a little underwhelmed of your starting group there, but still he gives you somebody that has played a lot of football, Joey, and I still think can be a disruptive player and be a solid player for Illinois.
Yeah, Leon Lowry, I'm with you, raise the floor, and then we pause. We pause until Gabe Akis says what he is or isn't going to do, and if he goes to the NFL or not, because that's going to change a lot in terms of how I think we should really fairly evaluate Leon Lowry as a pickup. If he's a depth guy, if he's a rotation guy with Gabe Akis, with Alec Bryant, with, as you mentioned, JoJo Hayden, Daniel Brown, all right. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. If you need him to come in and be a starter and produce like an edge rusher needs to produce in this defense, then you kind of have to really trust that they see something in their scheme or maybe try to go find a Gabe Akis replacement. So I guess TBD, is that the fair way to say kind of what to expect out of Leon Lowry as we await Gabe Akis?
I agree with it. But man, if these are your three additions to the defensive line and Lowry and you get Akis back and you get Bryant back.
Yes.
And there's only 2 more days to enter the portal. It seems like Illinois is going to keep most of that defensive front. I feel pretty dang good about this defense, Joey. Xavier Scott decides to come back. You're returning 4 of your top 5 linebackers. That was a position that needed to improve, but I think you have internal improvement. I mean, what Malachi Hood showed late in the year, what James Curt showed late in the year, getting Dylan Rosiak back, and then you add Ishmael Conte, the top junior college linebacker. I think that's enough. You add Grant Bierman, a 4-star that's going to take some time to develop, I would imagine. I think you got enough there. If Malachi Hood continues to improve and James Cruts continues to improve, which I would expect to be the case, and Conte adds a lot of athleticism. But then you think of the secondary. I mean, I expected more attrition here, Joey. Terrence Brooks is still here. Tyler Strain is still here. And all your other guys, if Xavier Scott is back with all of these 5 starters and all of your 2 deep, including Jaheim Clark and Mac Rosetich, who I thought were playing at a starting caliber level, like I'm pretty high that this defense can take another step forward after a significant step forward last year. If Akis and Scott are back with that, this could be the strength of the team is on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think, you think back to when Dylan Rosiak got hurt, and that was kind of, if you think back, I have to remember what we said exactly on the post-game pod or the following, week pod, and it's like, oh, this could be a problem, right? And it really turned into, hey, Malachi Hood, haven't seen him forever. And he looks like a guy who's starting to put it together. Hey, James Cruts, snaps, seeing things, slowing down. You're seeing the things that they like from him out of high school. And it didn't end up, obviously you're a better football team with Dylan Rosiak. I don't want anything to be misconstrued that you're not, but it didn't end up to be the total, holy crap, this is a nightmare situation that we thought it could have been just because we hadn't seen those guys. And then obviously that has led into maybe a little bit more confidence with those guys going into bowl prep, bowl season, going into spring ball. That turned out that you really learned a lot about your position group without your best player at that position. So I'm with you there. Secondary, I know they're really high on what that secondary can be next year as they continue to build depth. And you talk about guys, Werner and Woodward was a guy Miles Scott brought up, a guy Aaron Henry brought up. As those guys have more time in the system, and now all of a sudden, Corey Parker has loved to have a number, 4, 5, 6, if you could swing it, defensive cornerbacks that he's ready to throw in there at any given time. And whether that's giving guys a break or really pushing the envelope forward in terms of what you expect out of your starters and what they can give you, I really like how that is shaping up. in the secondary. I do want to say we did expect more attrition, Jeremy, from this roster. I don't think that door is closed. Like, it's time spring ball comes, you have a lot of academic things that you've checked off as a player. Maybe you've gotten your degree at that point, then you go. So I do think spring ball could be still open the door for some roster churn. I would imagine maybe that's still at the bottom of the roster in terms of the depth chart. So the 2 deep, I feel pretty good about. I mean, I don't know how much that's going to change in the spring, but some of the other roster churn in terms of opening up spots, I think will happen after spring practices.
But even at the corner spot, like we could, Terrence Brooks is a guy I'll have my eye on until the portal closes and then the spring again. But it's like he wasn't in the 2 deep at the end of the year.
Right.
It was James Clark, right? Like he was the guy that was kind of rotating in there, and Caleb Patterson and Torrey Cox are both back here. I think Matthew Bailey can be an absolute star because he was at the end of this past year. And you think about how those guys can improve going into another year. So defensively, I think they filled the holes that they have. And if they get the retention remains here, Joey, with their stars, and Bielema did say we could have some announcements around the holidays. So I'm kind of have my antennas poked up for that, right? It's holidays time. Yeah.
I know. Come on, buddy. We got to get moving here. I think we kind of learn how these guys go, right? In terms of how they want to announce this or announce that. If there were an announcement in Orlando, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm not trying to say, hey, expect this, but that's just kind of how Brett Bielema operates here, is understands where the cameras are, understands where the attention is. We'll see. We'll see if there's anything that changes there. But there's right now, Jeremy, as we go into kind of the back end of this portal season, really setting your spring or your winter workout, spring ball roster, there's 3 spots really that I'm looking at as to what happens. And that's J.C. Davis. What are you going to do? Because the door's open. There's not, the NCAA put it out there. There's not, oh, he's going to have to go to court and battle this. No way. If he wants to come back, that door is open for him to do so. And I would assume, the Icon Fund right now is probably turning over couch cushions and seeing what they can find in terms of getting stuff together for him. What is Gabe Akis going to do? What is Xavier Scott going to do? If you can find a way to get the 3 of those guys back, you really got something going here in terms of the 2025 season.
If you're like my wife and I, you're a big coffee person, right? Well, I'm excited to tell you guys about a new local sponsor, Columbia Street Roastery. The guys at CSR just sent my wife and I a few bags of their freshly roasted, locally made blends. And I got to say, we love it. We had one of their holiday blends, Crazy Elf, and their Tip of the Andes blend, and they're just smooth, fresh, and tasty coffee made right here in Champaign-Urbana. And right now, you can check out some of their holiday flavored coffees, including Crazy Elf, Christmas in a Cup, Santa Sunday Fun Day, which is kind of like a mocha, and then Jingle Bell Java and more. Or you can just try their wide variety of roasts, whether you like the light roasts or the dark roasts or flavored coffees. Some of the fun varieties of flavors include Kahlua caramel cream, hazelnut vanilla, salted caramel mocha, Jamaican me crazy, cookie doodle, creme brulee, and sticky bun. So you got to try these out. Check out their teas as well. They also have hot chocolate, and all of it is freshly roasted and, most importantly, locally made. So head on over to csrcoffee.com and you can get free shipping on orders over $40. They have great gift items as well, like monthly subscription options to box sets like their 12 Days of Christmas. So head on over to csrcoffee.com and get 10% off your first order with code GOILLINI24. That's csrcoffee.com with code GOILLINI24 to get 10% off your first order. All right, we'll dive into Davis. We'll dive into the offensive side of the roster and what they've added in the portal. But first, let's get to know more about the guys Illinois has added, because they went up north to Madison and grabbed 3 players for their defensive front. And to give us some insight is Nick Osen, 24/7 Sports. He covers the Badgers for Badger 24/7. Nick, good morning. How are you? Thanks for joining us on the holidays, man.
Morning, guys. Always great speaking with you. And, obviously coming on your show, I had to rep our team a little bit, man.
Rockford, Nick Osen. Yeah. I don't know how much of the game I'm going to get to watch with us traveling to Orlando today, but you're a better man for me for repping our team right now.
I appreciate it. It's a special one, a little bit of holiday flavor, but no, it's great to be back, guys. I know it's been busy season for both of us, and obviously we've got some ties here with your squad as well.
Well, what do you make of this, Nick? Brett Bielema going to Wisconsin and adding 3 of their defensive starters in James Thompson, a 4-star transfer according to 24/7 Sports. Curt Neal started at nose tackle, and Leon Lowry, who started at the edge.
Yeah, so just kind of really on a macro level and just kind of from the outset, it is interesting, right? I think obviously when you see things within conference, I think specifically the obvious ties from Bielema with this program. And, I obviously saw him recently. I was at the basketball game, right, where we were all at. And, he was just kind of saying what's up to some of the old Badger commentators and things like that. And when you just think of kind of these guys having not only played together, but they did start here at Wisconsin. I think that it makes sense in terms of them wanting to stick together. I know that Curt and James had a really good relationship, and James is one of the leaders with this defense. Curt, I think, was stepping into that role a little bit, especially when James went down, obviously with injury, and then Lowry was newer this season. But just in terms of overall fit and connections, I think it's intriguing. I think Lowry's a guy that we'll dive into a little bit more because he was somebody that I think maybe scheme did affect. And I know that's something we will touch on, even though he wasn't in the previous scheme here in Madison. I think for both sides, right, I think moving on probably made sense. James put a lot of time here, and I know we'll touch on some of his capabilities. The one that just maybe surprised me a little bit was Curt Neal. But once I started to see where they were visiting, I wasn't shocked that they got 2 of those guys. I'll admit I thought James would maybe end up in the SEC because, like you mentioned, Jeremy, legitimate 4-star transfer. Like, that's not somebody that, people are saying, oh, he was pushed out, nothing like that. Like, great kid, good leader, and was a good player here. So it'll be interesting. And I'm curious just to hear, are they expected to likely start for the Illini down there too?
Yeah, I would imagine Thompson is a plug and play. Curt Neal, I would imagine at least a big part of the rotation at nose tackle. Lowry, I think, will be a rotation guy at outside linebacker. That depends on Gabe Akis or not. But take me into Thompson. Had a pec injury this year, but as you said, was a team leader, 2-year starter. I see him as a guy that kind of plays in that Keith Randolph role. What was he for Wisconsin, and what do you think he can be? Because obviously Tennessee, Texas A&M, Texas Tech with all the money they're throwing around, there's some big schools in on him.
Yeah, there really were, and I think this was an opportunity, for James. Not necessarily ending up at Illinois, right? But just overall, I think this was a point, where he could get some opportunities, in terms of what you can do out there in this kind of ever-changing landscape with NIL and things like that. I think he is a guy that can be a pro, but not, like a surefire, right, day 1, day 2 type of guy. So a nice opportunity there. And what he was in Madison, I would say he's a little bit versatile with his size and length. Like, I think he's certainly more of kind of that defensive end. So not necessarily an interior, not necessarily an outside backer, but a good player. He's got a very high motor. I'll be honest, guys, he was somebody that, like, certainly fans and I think people in the know were excited about. And, unfortunately, he did get injured late in camp. We're fortunate to be able to see some of those practices. So it was like, boom, he got hurt, he went off, and then the feel was that it was kind of a long-term thing. I think it speaks to really who he is and the passion he had for Wisconsin, the passion he has for the game, that he worked his tail off to try to get back. He played like a game and a half at the end of the season. Maybe wasn't 100%, but just the way that he was able to do that. And, just in terms of a role, I like him as a run stopper. I think how I would really consider him as a disruptor, right? Maybe not a surefire pass rusher, not like the, 6'6.5", 340 type interior, but I think he can do a little bit of everything. And just the familiarity, I think, Bielema, the program here, the fact that Thompson actually does like the Midwest, I think that was part of why he didn't go SEC. I think it's an interesting fit. And like you said, Jeremy, certainly a guy that, he's not just coming in for potential snaps, right? He's a guy that I expect to see play a lot for your team in the Illini.
You said Curt Neal maybe surprised you a little bit, Nick. Tell us about him. What was surprising about that? And what did you see from him on the field?
Yeah, so, maybe not like the biggest shock of the group, right? But in terms of just the guys we're focused on, I was a little bit because, like you mentioned, he was a starter. He started to be a little bit more vocal with this team. And, I know us being in the media, like there were some tough stretches this season. He was always somebody that would kind of take on that ownership type of role, right? Speaking with us, saying we need to play better. This is going to be better, that type of thing. But you could feel the sincerity. I think he also had a ton of, real passion for this university and this program. I think that both staffs, the staff that recruited him, this current staff, I do think there was a lot of mutual respect and, kind of admiration within it. I think for him, Joey, what makes sense is kind of the fact that maybe this scheme wasn't perfect or like the most potentially inducive. I mean, he talked about that. He talked to, my colleague Evan Flood a little bit after his departure, and just in terms of maybe some of the techniques that they look for within the D line. I also think that it probably wasn't a huge secret that they needed to upgrade some depth and talent within Wisconsin. That's a reason they did hit the portal. But I think either way, he would have been a rotational guy. I like him more as, he's not the 6'6" guy, right? He's about, let's say, I think 6'1", 6.5 feet maybe. He's explosive. He's got good leverage. I like him as kind of the potential run stopper, but can again disrupt a little bit. I think he had about 1 sack this year, good amount of tackles, and he can eat up blocks. I know that was part of kind of the responsibilities within the scheme here. I look at Thompson as the biggest kind of playmaker within this group. But Neal was, decent player and certainly a starter like for Wisconsin that I would have thought would just maybe build on what he did. So I think, like you guys said, certainly expect at least a rotational type role for him.
Leon Lowry is so interesting to me, Nick, because he was a big deal for Wisconsin to get last offseason when he was leaving Syracuse. People wanted him and just didn't look like it connected there. Was that a scheme thing? Like, what was behind that? Because you watch his tape, the dude's got talent, and you saw that, and obviously he was really sought after when he left Syracuse. So what happened there?
Yeah, that is the most probably interesting out of the group, right? In terms of transferring out, not a huge shock, but when they brought him in, you're right, there was excitement, Joey. It was kind of an interesting recruitment a little bit. Like, he committed, and then he was going to decommit, and there was, like a NIL agent that wasn't probably looking out the best, you know what I mean? And I think Leon is a great kid. I certainly enjoyed speaking with him. He did have some nice tape coming out of Q's. He's got good size, and he is somebody that, I'll be honest, I mean, maybe this spoke to the defense being ahead of the offense, as I know we've all seen throughout covering levels of football. But back in the spring, like, I was writing about him, Evan was, many of the other reporters around, like, he was looking at kind of being a potential disruptor, impact player for the defense, often kind of getting to the edge. Now, I think part of it was this group of tackles getting used to him. I do think it took a little bit for him to adjust to the Big Ten. I will certainly say that. And then I think the third thing, Joey, was a little bit of scheme. I think that he's a good edge setter, and I think he's physical. He racked up 29 tackles, so you hope for a little bit more production. I think only 1 sack, but that just felt like a spot. The staff really liked him. He really liked Wisconsin. He came in, he's got a high motor, but I think that's probably one that just didn't work out. And I think that kind of is okay for both sides. Wisconsin's got good guys coming up. Lowry gets a chance, obviously, to stay in the Big Ten. And, I'm interested to see certainly what happens with the Illini potential returners. But he's the one that probably out of the group goes to another school. I think this will be his last year of eligibility, I believe. But wherever he would have ended up, likely looking with something to prove a little bit. Because, like, Neal was certainly a producer here. Thompson was going to be one of the best defensive players. I think Lowry would have hoped for himself, and certainly the fans, for a little bit more production this fall at times. We know I'm not, the best at always trying to be critical and things. I think he would have said he didn't probably achieve as much as he had hoped for. And now I'm really intrigued to see kind of his snap counts and his role under Bielema on the line.
I want to ask you about Wisconsin's offseason in a second because it really intrigues me of what's happening up in Madison. But do Wisconsin fans look at this as like, oh, no, those guys are all going to Illinois? Like, are they concerned about losing these guys?
So I think if I'm being honest, Lowry, I think the fans expected more. Neal is one that, like I said, he was a pretty big win for the Badgers at the high school ranks. He's a guy that has worked his way up. So I think a lot of fans really like and respect what he did. I think he's got the potential to be a really good player in a different scheme. But I think really the one, Jeremy, that I think they're like, dang, I really, really wish he was still a Badger is James. And I just felt like, I think I can speak for the other media members that were there. I remember it was a short day, right? Only 6 or 7 of us were talking with James Thompson near the end of the season. And I think the expectation, and maybe it was the truth at the time, was he'd either be back as a Badger or going for the league, right? It wasn't even for sure clear kind of his chances at getting more eligibility. So I think he's the one that, when you're reading the comments, and I trust people on our boards a little bit more than Twitter, that can get a little bit nasty out there. But I think overall, the feel is probably kind of what I said, like, wow, okay, they're sticking together. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, and we've talked, off of this too, the Illini have certainly kind of been on the upswing in terms of some recent success, but Thompson, probably the biggest impact name. And I think, I'm just really intrigued to see. And I believe our respective teams face each other next year too.
At Wisconsin Senior Day.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So Nick, take me in. Wisconsin's adding a lot of exciting transfers, but unlike Illinois has only added 6, but Illinois hasn't lost a lot of guys from their 2 deep. Wisconsin's lost a lot of starters, whether it's defensively, offensively, they've lost a couple of guys. What is happening there? After the second year of Luke Fickell, which obviously was disappointing, there's a lot of turnover. Is this a positive for Wisconsin?
So that's a really good question, my friend. I think, it's not, and I can say this because I do really try to tell it how it is, good or bad. From the outside, I'm sure people are seeing the numbers of sheer transfers and like, whoa, what's happening? I'm always impressed how closely you guys track the entire Big Ten. So, some of these guys started this year. Some of these guys maybe were primed for a good role next year. Some just weren't cracking the 2 deep, weren't seeing what they had hoped. So I think in terms of some of the defense, in the ways that, Coach Fickell told us at signing day, they're looking to get longer, more athletic, stronger on the edge. So perfect example, a guy like Lowry maybe fits in a better scheme. They're attacking some other spots differently. There were a couple guys, for example, Trech Kekayuna, a wide receiver. He had gone in the portal. That was one that fans were disappointed about. He was not a guy that was pushed out by any means at all. But he ends up coming back to the Badgers. He would have been the type that, fans would have been disappointed about. Will Pauling, a wide receiver that actually just signed with Notre Dame. He was an impact guy. I think it would have been tough for both he and Trech to kind of get to their potential. But as a whole, Jeremy, I think it's to be determined, right? I think some of these guys, they just weren't going to play as soon as they'd hoped. That's okay. Some were. And I think now, and the staff knows this, I mean, we see it. We see Fickell's sense of urgency. Like, they know this is a big impact type of year. If you guys have looked at the schedule, it is not easy by any means. But I think what they have done really well, and why I lean towards it being a positive, is they knew the biggest holes transferring in or out. They knew what they had to attack. That was 3 spots: quarterback, tight end, and I know you guys are probably familiar with Illinois native Tanner Koziel, who they got, and then defensive line. And so even though they've lost a couple, I do think they brought in some good players. So I will say time will tell as a whole. But while I think some of those players will go on to be good at other spots, I'm intrigued by what they brought in as well, like you said.
Last one I have for you, Nick, and this is because we're familiar. They fired their offensive coordinator, and obviously Phil Longo was brought in to change what Wisconsin was. Was Jeff Grimes a hire to go back to what Wisconsin's identity was before?
I think that's a really good way to put it. I think with his kind of pre-snap motion a little bit, outside zone run game, did do a little bit of play action. I think it was more so at BYU, but like some of the intricacies within that, I think are still modern. But in terms of the tight end, right, some more 2 tight end sets, big O-line background, and just some of the intricacies within the run game, even that you saw at KU, right? Even if they didn't win as many games, like Devin Neal, I want to say 1,350 rushing yards. Like, obviously Daniels can do some nice things. I think that's spot on. I think I don't want to, misquote. So I don't remember exactly what he said, but Fickell has talked about we want to kind of build off of the offensive line. And that makes sense, right? When you look at their last 2 recruiting classes and kind of the guys around the Midwest, I mean, you guys know this, like, you won't always get all the skill guys you might want or look for, but offensive line, you can do pretty damn well recruiting the Midwest and just outside of it. And so I think that is an example of that, Jeremy. I think it's going to be smart running game. You still need a good quarterback, and I do love their addition there with Billy Edwards Jr. And just as a whole, it's going to be a big year in Madison. And I think that Grimes was little bit on the safer side in terms of returning to some of what they're known for. But I think overall that will be a net positive for sure.
Nick Osen, Badger 24/7. Check him out on Twitter at the real Nick Osen. Nick, appreciate the time and insight, man.
Always love chatting with you guys. Safe travels and bear down.
Hey, see you February 18th, Nick. First beer is on you, I heard.
They generally are. See you guys.
See you, man.
I know you guys have heard me talk about Home Field Apparel a lot, but there's a reason. I have some of these shirts from Home Field Apparel, and they are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. And what I love about them is they're focused on creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. So go to homefieldapparel.com and check out their Illini gear. The Flying Illini t-shirt, I love. If they have any bomber jackets, go check those out. But you see all of these vintage designs that are great. They kind of stand out in a crowd, but also these are comfortable, well-fitting. They're not the boxy kind of ones you get at the random department store. No, these are well-fitted, comfortable t-shirts and apparel. So go check it out at homefieldapparel.com. Go to the drag down menu, click on Illini, and you'll see all of these great shirts, including Orange Crush, old school Fighting Illini basketball shirts, the Flying Illini t-shirt with the great winged logo, Script Illini gear, including t-shirts, hoodies, an orange ringer tee, the 2004-05 Illinois basketball shirts so you can relive those glory days, but also they have great hoodies, great crew necks, great Illini football gear, including the 80s Illini helmet on there. If you're an old school sweatshirt guy, they got those. If you're a quarter zip guy, they got those. If you want a women's tank there with the Script Illini, they got that. So go to homefieldapparel.com to check out all the great gear they have there. If you're not an Illini fan, they have more than 180 plus growing list of schools. So you can check out all the gear from all over the country. And right now, use code Illini24 for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. That's Illini24 for 15% off all of the gear at homefieldapparel.com. Good stuff with Nick Osen. I find Wisconsin so intriguing, Joey, because Illinois and Wisconsin are kind of the opposites this offseason. Illinois is kind of building, trying to add, fill in some holes. Wisconsin's just completely changing their roster. They just lost to Wee Walker, who's really good running back for them too, Will Pauling. So they're changing a lot of what they want, what they're looking for, but it also seems like guys are leaving. But when it comes to what Illinois added, kind of what I expected, and that James Thompson is good. Like I have no concerns about him. He's a plug and play starter. The other two, I think it's going to be very intriguing to see what they do with a different scheme, with a different coaching staff.
Yeah, from a straight up intriguing standpoint, Leon Lowry is more intriguing to me than Curt Neal. Like I feel like maybe that's just leaning into the positions and what you can get out of those in terms of like game-changing plays, right? Edge is certainly more available than that nose tackle. But Lowry was a big deal to get for Wisconsin out of Syracuse. Like that is obviously I still think Gabe Backus and his decision is going to frame how I think about Leon Lowry's impact at Illinois, but I don't want to overlook how big of a deal that was for Wisconsin to get him, how sought after he was out of Syracuse. Like that's not fake, right?
Yeah, just to give people some insight. He was the number 18 edge player, I believe, a couple of years ago, or is that now? I'm looking at this now. Go ahead, Joe. But yeah, he was a well thought of guy, and he still is by 24/7.
Yeah, so I mean the talent's there. So like talking to Nick, maybe just kind of, Gabe Backus is Gabe Backus, and that's going to determine a lot. But Lowry, he does raise the floor of that outside linebacker room. There's no doubt there. And can he push the ceiling a little bit, right? That's what I'm so interested in. Did Illinois talk to him and get a sense that, hey, this Wisconsin system was not it, right? Like that did not fit his skill set. And did they unlock that Syracuse? We talked to Aaron very, very briefly about Leon Lowry. Did they go into that Syracuse tape to see this is the guy, right? Like this is what we think we can unlock more of this. I think he's so interesting to me. And I don't mean to overlook Curt Neal because I think he is going to be a rotation guy, whether that's a starter or whether that's going to be behind a General Hunt or Jeremiah Warren. We'll see how that plays out, Jeremy, over the course of the next few months. But Lowry's fascinating.
Yeah, all good quotes, by the way. Been watching some of the YouTube stuff that Nick and
that's what we need.
Yeah, they're all. Curt Neal's a really interesting dude. James Thompson's what you'd expect out of a guy who's been a team captain and a multi-year starter. Looking back, Lowry was the number 16 linebacker, was a borderline. He was 89, which is our highest 3-star rating, 24/7 Sports Transfer last year, 204 overall in the transfer portal last year. This year, he's the number 18 edge guy. So even despite like not having the most production last year, our guys at 24/7 Sports rated him very highly. So I just think the floor on all of these guys is so high, and that's what Illinois needed in this transfer portal cycle. Add guys that can be starters. All of these guys can be solid to serviceable starters, and then you get the improvement behind them. But then if you unlock something out of Lowry, you unlock something out of Neal, like these are guys with good pedigree. Neal had offers from almost everybody in the SEC and Big Ten as a prep prospect, and you get him for 2 years. And Durajaye, I don't want to leave him out because we're talking about the Wisconsin guys. He could be as talented as any of them, just physically with his burst and size and the combination there. Again, he reminds me a little bit of Dennis Briggs. Like they've added 4, no doubt, rotation pieces and potentially 3 or 4 starters.
Can I put you on the spot real quick?
Yeah.
Which one of those guys? I mean, I think we assume, like, if you think about last season's portal cycle, I think we assume Thompson and J.C. Davis. You can look at them similarly, different positions, but plug and play. Which one of those other group of guys on that defensive side is your Torrey Cox or your Melvin Priestley, where maybe they're kind of on the we're not talking about them like we talked about those other two, but end up being guys that you're like, dang, good thing Illinois called them.
What's interesting is all those guys are thought of more highly than Torrey Cox.
Right, that's right. It's not an apples to apples entirely, but we're in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, like I think of James Thompson as a little bit more proven than Dennis Briggs, as I said. I think Curt Neal's a starter. I have no doubts that I really have very few doubts he'd be a starter. Maybe Jeremiah Warren plays so well and he's a little bit bigger that he ends up winning that job. But I think the floor is really high with him. I'm a fan of him. Lowry's the most intriguing guy for me this year because, like Nick was saying, like there's some talent there. And I just wonder with the scheme. Durajaye to me is the ultimate wild card. Like I can see him, like he didn't play this year at Florida State. Now they had a lot of guys they paid a lot of money to on that defensive front that they wanted to play. But that wasn't a good team. And he didn't start at West Virginia. So maybe the floor is a little lower with him, but I think the ceiling, if they can unlock it, is pretty high. But I think they love Alex Bray, and it would not shock me if Durajaye is just a part of the rotation next year. But I can also see him being kind of a surprise to people that he's like the 4th guy we're talking about here. But I think the talent is pretty high.
Yeah, which I think I ask you that in the sense of just kind of how the portal works, right, Jeremy? Like you've seen stars that a year ago we were talking so much about your Terrence Brooks, your Kevin Wigginton's, guys that you didn't really see much in the rotation. It's like, hey, they also got Torrey Cox too. And we'll see what this Melvin Priestley got all sorts of penalties. We'll see what that looks like for Illinois. And those guys were huge additions. So it's ratings matter, stars matter, talent matters. But it's just really when you start getting into transfers and guys who are a little bit more developed and not so much of a ball of clay as an 18-year-old high school kid, that's like, okay, what can the scheme, what can, just flat out a different voice, a different approach from the coaching staff, what can that unlock? And I think that's what makes transfer portal recruiting so fascinating to me. And I'm not trying to lessen the blow for Illinois not getting a Dane Key or for not getting some of those high-end guys that they pushed after, even a Miles McVay type guy. But you get some of these older guys, and let's see what happens with the new voice and a new scheme.
All right, Joey, let's talk about the offensive side because we haven't talked about that. Let's get into J.C. Davis first, right? Because this could be the most important news we have remaining outside of Gabe Atkins and Xavier Scott, and I think he's just as big as either of those guys. So the Pavia case. Basically what happened is Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt quarterback, who had some huge upsets this year, sued the NCAA, saying they do not have the power to say that JUCO years count as years of eligibility because the JUCO ranks are not run by the NCAA. Neither is the NAIA level. Well, a Tennessee court granted him an injunction to allow him to play this year. So another loss for the NCAA in federal court, which continues to rack up losses.
Don't show up to court anymore if you're the NCAA. Just take your loss, go home, save your time.
Which they are appealing this decision. But in the meantime, we know the courts take time, Joey. So what is the NCAA to do if Pavia gets this? Every other former JUCO or NAIA player is going to sue them. So they just say anybody who was a senior in 2024, that's played a year of JUCO or NAIA, you are allowed to play this year. So all of a sudden, Zy Chrysler has another year of eligibility, lost a starting job, goes to the transfer portal. He's going to be in high demand. So good for Zy Chrysler, but he lost the job. This was not a surprise that he entered the transfer portal. Is a depth loss for Illinois. But the biggest news is J.C. Davis, who played at Contra Costa College in 2021, has another year of eligibility, Joey. And Illinois still has a huge need at left tackle. And you and I are sitting there thinking, why haven't they added anybody? Well, maybe this is why. It's because now their best case scenario, the best potential player they could add, better than anybody in the portal, is J.C. Davis returning for another year of eligibility. And this makes a lot of sense for Illinois to invest as much money as makes sense for them to get J.C. Davis back, a second-year starter to protect Luke Altmaier's blind side. Also makes a lot of sense for J.C. Davis because he's a borderline draft pick, it sounds like. 6th, 7th rounder. He's going to the Senior Bowl. Maybe he can work his way up to a 4th or 5th rounder, something like that. All Big Ten third-team guy. But I don't think he's going to be a day 2 pick. So if you can make over $500,000, which I think he would, if he comes back for another year, that's a lot of guaranteed money. He's a little younger. He just turned 21, I believe.
Yeah.
So this is a guy that I think still has more development and can really help his NFL draft stock. So this is huge, and it makes sense to me on both sides. If J.C. Davis wants to do this, if I'm Illinois, this is my marquee addition, is bringing J.C. Davis back.
Absolutely. And I think back to just talking to J.C. Davis when he got on campus, and I just want to paint how differently this could be for him. He was ready to go D3 out of high school. He was a COVID kid. Obviously, that whole recruiting process was difficult, right? He was ready to go D3. I think it's a defensive lineman. And he meets this JUCO coach, and this coach is like, hey, come here for a year. We're going to get you out of here. But caveat is you're going to be on the offensive line for us. He obviously went there. That parlayed into straight to New Mexico, I believe. And now, as it turns out, you circle back. Had he gone D3, perhaps his road is different in its entirety. But that extra year that he could be looking at it and possibly, more than $500,000 for coming back to college football, maybe that's not there. And as you mentioned, he's young for his class. There's more development. NFL isn't like the NBA. In the NBA, if you're over like 21, I don't know about that. This is a big draft risk. NFL, not as much, but even so, he'd be going to the NFL if he were to come back to Illinois at 22 years old, right? So it's not really the biggest difference in the world. And he's got a chance to come back and really take another step forward as a marquee left tackle with the guy, protecting Luke Altmaier on offense, you think can really take a step forward. We'll see what he does. I don't it's fair to speculate now because the door's open for him. Illinois recruiting quiet a little bit, right? Transfer portal recruiting is quieter. Yeah. But there has just been, it's like there's some early tackles very, very early on when that portal opened. And then it's whether they're being quiet or whether they're like, hey, we're feeling we're going to make a push for J.C. Davis. We'll see what that looks like. But there has not been a lot of tackle buzz for Illinois.
The one guy I would keep an eye on would be Idaho's Aiden Kanapnik. It's not a silent K. I just looked that up, Joey. It's Kanapnik. So he's an interesting guy that could be a plug-and-play starter, was solid in the Big Sky. So he's a guy that could make sense for them. But J.C. Davis is J.C. Davis. He could be an all Big Ten first or second teamer next year, right? And I think really work his way up in the NFL draft rankings. But Luke Altmaier did post a reply on one of J.C.'s posts here. I think it was a week ago.
This is one more year coverage in 2024.
Yes. One more year, and J.C. Davis said #JUCO product. I don't know why he wouldn't be interested in this, and especially at Illinois where he's taken a step forward. I thought he lived up to every hype that we had early on. It was kind of like, yeah, he's getting his bearings. Obviously nobody played well against Penn State, and he gave up some pressures there. But I thought the last 5-6 games he was dominant. I thought he was as good as a stretch of left tackle play that we've seen, and we've seen some good guys have gone on to the NFL, Vidarian Lowe and Julian Pearl. So I thought he was awesome at left tackle. I thought he was their best offensive lineman by far. So for me, this would be, him, Gabe, Xavier. Like this is where my money goes. Him, Gabe, Xavier, and Luke Altmaier. If you'd have told me there's a chance to get all 4 of those guys back, I would have said, despite any portal, which obviously they had to add, but that would be a home run season to bring all 4 of those stars back.
Yeah, there's 2 things that really interest me with, I guess one thing with J.C. Davis. Byron Bell he came really at the same time as J.C. Davis from New Mexico, GA. Illinois thinks really, really highly of him long-term as a coach. He obviously has a huge impact on J.C. Davis. J.C. talked to me about him over the course of the season and just the relationship they have. Byron Bell's played in the NFL. He can pretty much shoot it straight with J.C. Davis in terms of, you're not doing this, you need to do, like, there's a really powerful relationship between those two. I think you obviously would include Bart Miller in that, and the development that he's had with Bart Miller, the trust he's had with Bart Miller, with Brett Bielema, I assume with Barry Lunny. I think that matters. And the continuity that we talked about with Luke Altmaier, you can add that with, sub-in Byron Bell for Art Sikowski, right? And in terms of what we're talking about, the trust that they have there. So I do wonder if that would play into Illinois in the hand and say, hey, you trust these guys, you trusted them to get you to this level. Trust them to push you one more step further up those NFL draft boards. That I kind of joked, Jeremy, we talked a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember when it was, who are the Big Ten Media Day guys? If you get J.C. Davis back, him and your quarterback, and then pick a defensive player. Yeah. Those are your three.
Maybe it's Xavier Scott if he decides to come back, because Gabe has already done it. Yeah, you could return all 5 starters on the offensive line. And listen, I would still add another guy to add some competition, whether that's a guy who could play tackle and maybe Melvin Priestley can move in at guard, or somebody who can push. I think Josh Gesky's pretty safe, but I am high on Brandon Henderson. But you always want competition. You always want depth. So what you mentioned, Byron Bell, the other guy he knows is DJ Winfield, who's a Purdue transfer just entered the portal. Like, I wonder if you could sell him on the opportunity to push one of those guys to start, because he was a solid starter for Purdue last year. Somebody like that, maybe you don't have enough money to go get somebody like that, but I would still add another piece, because you are losing Zy Chrysler. You are losing, I know Wigginton didn't play much, but you are losing Hunter Whiteneck. Those guys are part of the 2 deep. TJ McMillan. I mean, who else in that 2 deep are you ready to say, yeah, this guy's definitely ready to step in and start?
Yeah, I'm with you. That was the point I was going to bring up, is you lose 3 guys you thought could have gone in there. And Zy Chrysler was a rotation player, right? He wasn't if he lost his job, he played 497 snaps.
Desmond Schuster.
Des Schuster is in that conversation. Is Malcolm Moeller a guy? Brandon Hansen is, Kellen Francis notably traveled at the end of last season. Is he a guy who, with an offseason they think could be in that 2 beats? That's why I do think getting another guy out of the portal, or maybe you go, scour JUCO for another guy. Maybe that pays off down the line, right? I mean, we don't know. That could be something that you look at down the line and say, hey, maybe
probably mention that, right? Because like a lot of people ran with it that every JUCO kid every year, JUCO is another year of eligibility. That is not the case yet. It sounds like we're just going to change eligibility. You get 5 years to play 5.
Brett Bielema and Brad Underwood have been like screaming this from the mountaintops. I mean, that's probably what it ends up. Someone's just got to take the reins and do this and push this and see how that goes. But I do think adding another offensive lineman, if you can swing it. And here's the thing, like, this isn't Madden, right? Like, yes, on the surface for Illinois, heck yeah, go get an offensive lineman to come in and be depth or push for a starter. But if you're an offensive lineman, you're probably looking for a market where you don't have to be a depth guy. So you've got to find that right balance. And that's what makes the portal difficult as you start getting into this stage. Is you might be looking for depth, but somebody else is looking for a chance to start and probably some cash to come with it.
A lot of cash is involved here. And that's why retention, again, is really important, because you can kind of, have that depth ready to go. Like, I think the ideal would be like a multi-year tackle who can provide some depth, maybe your swing guy next year, but also maybe push for one of those top 5 spots. And then you can figure out what you want to play at guard. But again, it's not an ideal world, and all this comes with prices. So you got to pick and choose what you go with there. We are almost an hour into this podcast, and we haven't talked about the sexiest positions yet, Joey. I'm proud of us. This is really
this is what you got into this field to do. It's just been 55 minutes talking about the trenches, Jeremy.
For quarterbacks and wide receivers, let's talk about the trenches. All right, let's get into it. Justin Bowick, Ball State transfer. I think he's number 31 wide receiver in the transfer portal. Dane Key was a big name that Illinois was going after, but so was Georgia, so was Ole Miss. And then Nebraska came in here and stole him away. One of the best wide receivers, one of the best players overall in the portal. He goes to Nebraska. Illinois is involved in some other guys, including Chaz Nimrod out of Tennessee. I don't think he's ended up anywhere quite yet. But they get Justin Bowick, who had visited Penn State and Louisville and some other, I think Cincinnati was another one, had really a lot of people in on him. Started his career at Eastern Illinois, Then he went to Ball State, only played 4 games, partly due to injury, but partly because he had 2 unbelievable games, combined for about 350 yards and 3 touchdowns in November, and decides, oh, I should probably keep some eligibility here. Enters the transfer portal, has 2 years of eligibility left. This has been their big addition at wide receiver. 6'4", Joey, 200 pounds, big target. I broke down his film for people at the VIP. Huge catch radius, really can get behind a defense, but a big target that Luke Altmaier could throw it up to. What do you think of this addition and how it impacts the wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be a guy who is a front line. Is you probably think to him coming as a starter? I think that's fair to assume as Illinois loses Pat Bryant, as Illinois loses Zachary Franklin, a big-bodied guy. I mean, that's what I really stands out to me, Jeremy, is he's big body, but he's not slow, right? I mean, he's still got some ability to stretch the field. You've seen that. Cool story, honestly, coming from Eastern Illinois to Ball State to now Illinois and had options out of the transfer portal. And if you're Barry Lunny, you say, hey, you got this dude throwing you the ball, and Luke Altmaier, we've developed effectively back-to-back first-team All-Big Ten guys. We like your skill set. We think you can unlock a little bit more. We think maybe Tank Wright can unlock some more speed to pair with your big frame. And there's a lot of upside there. And the hard part is when you lose a Pat Bryant, when you lose a Zachary Franklin, you probably, if you're a fan, you're looking at this like, ooh, production shirts. Right? I would like to see some more of that. But Bowick's a guy who's got a lot of potential. In those 4 games, good for him for saying, like, when you think about his path, I know somebody's going to hear this and say, good for him for stopping after 4 games. Well, when you've gone from Eastern and then you've kind of fought your way to this point, you got to do what's best for you.
Business, man. College football is a business now.
Yes.
And Ball State was bad, right? Like they fired their coach. They were a bad team, 3-9. I don't know how they were that bad when they had 2 wide receivers who were going to the Power 5 level. Tanner Kojal is one of the best tight ends in the country, now going to Wisconsin. I don't know. The rest of the team was awful. But yeah, I can't blame him. He was on a bad team, ended up 3-9 and fired his coach. Like, I don't feel too bad for Ball State.
No, and he ended up in the Big Ten, and he's got a chance to really, take a step in an Illinois passing offense that looks like it's going in the right direction. I shouldn't say it looks. It is going in the right direction, what we've seen the last 3 years with Barry Lunny Jr. So not the production guy that you saw like a Zachary Franklin, or not the production guy that Pat Bryant would have been had he entered the portal over the last 2 years, but a guy that if you turn on the tape, you can see the skill set, you can see the potential. And now you're on Justin Stepp, who's developed a number of wide receivers, on Barry Lunny, on Luke Altmaier, a good quarterback, on Tank Wright to kind of keep pushing that forward. And if you believe in this coaching staff and their development, their ability to unlock talent that we've seen, yeah, man, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, like you and I talked about, we'd like to add a marquee wide receiver. Bowick is not that on paper. I think he's got the chance to be a number 1 receiver. He is not Dan Key. But Dan Key is really hard to get, right? But I think Justin Bowick is likely a starter. And if he's not a starter, that means Malik Elzy or Alex Kapka-Jones has done a hell of a job in the offseason, or Ashton Hollins has done a hell of a job in the offseason. He raises the competitive level of that group that you need to get a lot out of and that has a lot of questions, but he also raises the floor. He's a proven FBS producer, proven Division I producer at this point. But I've seen a lot of people say they need to go get another wide receiver. Number 1, I don't know if that guy's out there. And if you're going to add a guy like Chaz Nimrod, who I think is gettable, you're probably running off somebody else. Are you running off a Malik Elzy? Are you running off, somebody else on this team? So I think Bowick adds to the competition of this group. And I think it's going to be a fun spring to watch this group because Colin Dixon and Hank Beatty, I think, are slotted in at that slot. I think those guys are going to be pretty dang good. I think their production level is going to go way up. But then, what is it like competition-wise between Malik Elzy and Justin Bowick and Alex Kapka-Jones and Ashton Hollins? I feel better about that rotation. I think you're going to see more of a rotation next year. And I just don't think you're going to get a Pat Bryant level producer, right? I think you're going to see more of 4 guys with 30 or 40 catches in this group. That's kind of how I look at it until I see it, come to fruition on paper. Maybe Bowick can be a 700 catch guy on 40 or 700 yard guy on 40 something catches. But, I like the addition. He definitely helps your group, but it's not easy to go find another Pat Bryant. Like Dane Key was the only guy in the portal that I saw and was like, that's a 1-for-1 trade that works out well.
Can I say Pat Bryant, 54 receptions, Zachary Franklin, 51 receptions this season. The next closest wide receiver, Colin Dixon with 17. again, that's not it worked for Illinois. And you got 2 NFL guys. Like, we'd be writing columns like, why in the world are they not featuring these guys within the offense? But the point is, like, there's opportunity for those guys to take a step. I think the spring is massive, Jeremy, for those younger wide receivers or maybe less proven. I don't know if you can say some of those guys are younger at this point, given that they've been in college football for long enough.
What I love about this bowl game is the opportunity to see it. If Alex Kapka-Jones is the starter, or if Malik Elzy gets more targets, what does he do with those targets? We saw him have some ups and downs in the spring game, but it was fun to see him out there and say, oh, he's capable. Like, Malik Elzy is capable. He's got the talent to be a number 1 wide receiver, but you couldn't just not add anybody. But now if you add just another guy, do you want to lose that guy after 2 years in your program and thinking of what you think of him now that he's got that opportunity? But for Malik Elzy, the time is now. Like, this is his time, but you had to go add a guy like Justin Bowick now.
Absolutely. And look, here's the thing. If some guy who isn't just a guy were to call Illinois and say, I would like to be there with Luke Altmaier, well, then you just roll the dice and say, well, if you lose someone, you're getting this guy who's a dude. And you just kind of, but if you don't feel like that's there, then you've got to kind of play a little bit of the game in terms of cost benefit analysis. What's worth it? Who do you lose? And maybe in the spring, Jeremy, maybe they get through spring and they say, you know what? Not enough there right now. We have this guy at quarterback. We have, everything else around him. We don't have enough there right now. And maybe they do get into that market. And then you just kind of roll the dice. And if someone goes, but you go get another guy out of the transfer portal. I think that's what I kind of like linebacker at this point. Maybe you get through spring and it's good and you stand pat, or maybe you get through spring and you're just not where you want to be and you shop around to see if it's Zakari Franklin. Zakari Franklin's around forever, but if that type is out there and you can revisit that position a little bit. But it's a huge spring for some of those guys. And we talk about that. I don't think he's a guy that is really, really in this discussion, but does a Braden Trimble come in, get bigger in this winter workout and push for, some more snaps? I don't know. I think that's probably not on the highest end of likelihood, but in terms of freshmen in this class who could make an impact, he would be a guy you would have to have in that conversation. But this is your Colin Dixon. Does Colin Dixon slide outside? Does he stay in the slot? This is your Malik Elzy. This is yours, Alex Kapka-Jones. Is he more of an idea, or is he more of a guy you can lean on to put out there? Those are the 3 names to me, right? Because I know what Hank Beatty is, and I know where Hank Beatty fits, but everyone else, it's how do they fit presumably around Justin Bowick?
And I know they've been high on Ashton Hollins in the past, but I
forget about him. Yeah.
Like Hank Beatty, wouldn't surprise me he had 40 catches next year, right? Like, Luke really trusted him, and Hank really produced late in the season. Like, Colin Dixon's got another gear to him. I think we all think that guy can be one of the top 2 receivers on the team. And
what Brett Bielema call him, a war daddy at signing day?
I think a top 2
definition of that.
And between Bowick and Elzy, I think you can have a number 1 guy or 2 guys that you can throw the ball up to and say, hey, that guy can go get it. Like, that's what Luke Altmaier needs. So that group's going to be fun to watch in the offseason. It's going to be fun to watch in the Citrus Bowl, to be honest with you.
You know what it is? And that's what, you get into portal season. Before the portal got like this, everyone would have been like, yeah, let's see what Malik Elzy, what Colin Dixon can do. And then portal season obviously changes what's available to you. And it's like, no. We don't need to wait to see. Let's go get some. And I understand when you've got a quarterback like you've got, and you're on the trajectory that you're on, you want to push that. But I've said it before on here. I'll say it again. It's foolish to overlook internal development in transfer portal era, especially as a program like Illinois that isn't going to stop with it. They believe in their ability to develop players, and they believe in their ability for players to guide players to make that jump. And they're recruiting the guys who are going to be ready to make that jump and understand the Pat Bryant-like process, or understand the, Jeremy, name your Xavier Scott-like process in terms of slowly rising to this moment. And we'll see if that plays out. And if it doesn't in the spring, then they'll probably shop around in the portal, because they are not going to just, dig their heels so far into the developmental sand that they're going to waste their final year of Luke Altmaier. I don't believe that to be true at all. I think they're just going to give these guys a fair chance to go in there and take that, and trust your recruiting evaluation, trust your process to get them here.
You could go up and down this roster: Aiden Lowry, Josh Kreutz, Josh Geske, right? Alex Bray and Pat Farrell and Jeremiah Warren are going to be part of that. Dylan Rosiak and Malachi Hood and James Curt, right? Like you mentioned all those DBs that we talked about, Miles Scott, Matt Krasevich, and
Caleb Patterson.
Yeah, Caleb Patterson. Like that development still is huge in that position, wide receiver. They also added a quarterback. We talked with Baron Luddy. It was pretty clear they were going to add one after Donovan Leary entered the portal, and Leary ends up at Tulane, where he's going to have to battle for the job with TJ Finley. He's a more proven guy, so an interesting stop for him. But I do think he's got a better chance of winning the job there than he does at Illinois with Luke Altmaier here. But you get Ethan Hampton, the NIU starter last year. A lot of John Paddock similarities here in that started a year in the MAC, but Hampton has 2 years of eligibility left. He's an Illinois native out of Elburn, I believe it is, Illinois. And, 2 years of eligibility here, but also he played some big games, man. He played Tennessee 2 years ago, and I think they were within 7 points of that game. Go to Notre Dame, win a game. He's more of a game manager in that game, but that was enough to help his team win. And they played really well against NC State as well. So kind of reminds me of Paddock in that he's not going to wow you. He's kind of a max starter, not going to wow you physically, but his competitiveness, his ability to get out and run is really impressive to me. And just that experience you can't trade for. And they needed that in the quarterback room because Trey Petty probably is a year away, right? Most likely. So this is a really, really solid addition and a really important one because Luke Altmaier stayed healthy this year. You never know, though.
Yeah, you never know. And it's why kind of the appeal for Donovan Leary a year ago is you're a snap away. It's now probably the appeal for Ethan Hampton. And they are high on Trey Petty. I mean, his name came up. It was Luke Altmaier, Donovan Leary, and Trey Petty. Were very, very often mentioned by Brett Bielema, by Barry Lunney. So, like, they're high on what he can be. But at the same time, you can be as high on what somebody can be all you want. But if your starting quarterback goes down at the end of the day, are you ready to give the ball to a redshirt freshman in a season that you don't want to be 2023, that you want to keep pushing back to a bowl game, push further up that ladder with a roster that, again, we've talked about. We think there's some upside to this roster. There's a chance. It's young. It's in the system. You're about what Illinois could possibly do. That's why it made sense. It always made sense for Illinois to go get a guy who'd been around. John Paddock was probably a little more under the radar. Ethan Hampton was committed to Wake and was ready to go in there until Dave Clawson, kind of randomly from our vantage point, decided to step down. So this is a good get for Illinois to come in as a backup quarterback, to come in and be a guy if Luke Altmaier gets banged up, and then continue that bridge. Like, bridging is so important in develop programs. And Brett Bielema, they've said it, they're a developmental program. You got to bridge, man. And development can be hindered if you put a Trey Petty in there. And Art Sikowski, him at Rutgers, where he goes in and he's just not ready. And things get hard and things go poorly. Now you've got another year for him to learn to talk to Barry Lunney, to Luke Altmaier, to be prepared for what could be his 2026 season, where you're going to see him as the best possible chance to be a starter, I would imagine.
All right, let's wrap this up. Number one need left in the portal, Joey, is what?
Well, that's tough because we just spent an hour talking about it. Your left tackle does or doesn't come back.
It's still offensive line, right? I mean, until J.C. Davis, we hear about J.C. Davis. Still offensive line. Like, if you don't add J.C. Davis, I think you need two of them, right?
Yes, that's right. If J.C. Davis goes on to the NFL, you've got to get two offensive linemen. If he comes back, you can get him back in a reserve. So that's number one. If he comes back, it would move to number two for me because I think tight end is a huge position of need. Cole Rusk is coming back off of an ACL injury, some other damage, I guess, early there in fall camp for him. How much can you rely on a guy coming back? They're very excited about what he can be, what he showed them before the injury. You're still coming off of that injury, and that's not nothing. Tanner Arkin is back. Otherwise, you lose Henry Boyer, who ends up at Kentucky. Carson Goda is out of eligibility, right? St. Anselm was a D2. We have to ask ourselves that now. So then Jake Furtney, is Tanner Hollinger a guy who's ready early on? I think the answer is you go, and we've seen them offer tight end. So it's not like we're speculating that, hey, maybe a tight end would work. No, they're after tight end. So that's two with the ability to move up to one, depending on J.C. Davis.
Yeah, NCAA Division II, St. Anselm. I didn't double check that.
You have to.
Eligibility is insane in the NCAA. It's tight end. They need another inline guy. I mean, the idea of moving Jordan Anderson there in like an H-back role is really interesting, with adding 2 high school freshman running backs. That could be an interesting thing because we've seen the little parts of it where he kind of plays that fullback role. I think that could be a way he gets on the field and can really help you. He's a really good pass catcher, but you still need an inline tight end, like a 6'5" guy who could block people. And I would like to get a guy with multiple years of eligibility so he and Cole Russ can play together because Henry Boyer, you might not look at as huge loss, but he played 100+ snaps. And that was another blocker that I kind of had pegged as when Tanner Arkin goes, Henry Boyer, plug him in. And he's kind of your starter next to Cole Rusk. And with as much 12 personnel as they run, they got to have 4 guys ready to play. And they have 2 upperclassmen right now. I'm not counting Clayton Leonard in that group right now. So 2 tight ends that really you're going to play. Maybe I'll mention again, Jake Furtney can be that 4th guy, Joey, but I wouldn't be comfortable yet with him as my 3rd guy. So, yeah, they need one, and they seem to be pursuing one. The last one would be punter. You lose Hugh Robertson to the portal. We'll see if he wants to play another year of college football or just move on with his life. But Declan Dooley moves on. It's Fabrizio Pinton time. It sure seems to be the case, but he's only got 1 year of eligibility, and you need another capable punter on your team. I'm sure David Alano could do it if you really needed him to. But, they need a guy who can compete for that starting job because Pinton only has 6 career punts, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, he looked good when he did it, but then he got hurt, and you didn't get to see that over a longer sample size. Punters, I didn't think we'd be talking about punter as your number 3 transfer position need. Really at any point this offseason, even as the dominoes started to fall like they had. But
that's also a good thing, right? That
absolutely.
Punter, big need here.
Yeah, and look, maybe they end up with, Fabrizio Pinton was in the portal this time a year ago. So maybe they end up with the Declan Dooley or Hugh Robertson back. I don't know. Like, we just have to leave that door open for a possibility. But I think as you look at it and, Dooley starting to get offers from places, probably makes sense for them to shop around the transfer portal a little bit and bring someone in to push Pinton still. He still doesn't have all that where you're just, 1,000% comfortable giving him the job and saying, congratulations, you want some depth to push him. So, yeah, that's a sneaky one, Jeremy, but one that we've seen what happens when punting, goes south at Illinois here.
So what are we saying here? Robbie Disher, you got some work to do, man. Tight end and punter, both on this list. So he's got some busy days ahead of him. The portal does close on the 28th, 2 days from now. So you'll at least know who's leaving and who's going, who's leaving until the spring. So at least you had that locked in. And I don't think there's a ton of available scholarships. I mean, you can go up to 105, but on my list right now, I have 93. I don't think they're going to go much higher. Like 95 would be about as high as I think they would go.
Yeah, I mean, because to break it down as simply as we can, for every scholarship you fund over 85, up to I think $2 million, Jeremy, that cuts into your $22 million pool that you've got to pay athletes. So at some point, you've got to kind of allocate your money to the top of the roster. That's what it comes down to. And Illinois football doesn't have $22 million. Illinois athletics has $22 million, and that'll be divvied up, and we'll see exactly how that gets split up around all of the sports at Illinois. But the vibe I'm getting, Josh Whitman said they're not funding 105. Illinois is not alone in that.
Most of the SEC and Big Ten, right? Are in that.
SEC has a mandate. There are 85. In the SEC, I would, be curious if the Big Ten does something similar to that, Jeremy. But I don't know that a lot of coaches. I know early on when this whole house settlement happened, all these, a lot of SEC schools came out and said, "Yeah, 105," and I think as kind of the picture became more clear, it's like, "Oh no, that is not good in the big picture." So I don't
because
imagine
you and I, as you broke down about the you subtract over 85 from your this huge math problem. But basically, I just want to tell people the top 45 in the roster are getting most of the money, right? Like that's where most of the money outside of scholarships is going to go to. It's just you're too deep. So that's where those big deals are going to come. And it's why you're going to continue to see this kind of movement because you're jockeying for that top 45 spot. And, for a guy like Zy Chrysler, he's a top 45 guy at Illinois, but he's a top 20 guy somewhere else because he's a starting guard for them. So that's why you're going to see these guys continue to move. But most of that money is going to go to the top half of the roster.
Absolutely. So that's, I know people are going to say, well, I'm funding 105. No one, I shouldn't say no one. Very few if any, are going to do that. So that's really going to be fascinating nationally to see how that looks and how that plays out, Jeremy. The other thing I want to add, and I think we will know, you said the portal closes in 2 days. It does. We will know until the spring who's on Illinois' roster. And I say that because Brett Bielema is not going anywhere as the head coach at Illinois. So you're not going to have that. But I think the carousel still got some spinning to do. And I'm curious how there's going to be dominoes out of that spinning carousel here as coaches leave and take jobs. And when coaches leave, that opens a window for players on the team they left to enter the portal. So
and
Illinois
playoff teams, right? Like as their season ends, those guys can still enter the portal for the 5-year period.
Illinois, you're good. Brett Bielema's not going anywhere. But there will be, in some capacity, how large, how small that pool, I don't know. But there will still be new guys able to enter the portal before that spring window. And the hard part with that, Jeremy, is classes have begun for the most part by that point, by the time the portals really gets going. So there's some logistics there, but there's going to be some more entrants for sure here over the course of the next month.
All right. That's 75 minutes of Illinois football offseason talk before we get on a plane today for Orlando. We will have plenty for you guys when we're down at the Citrus Bowl, the latest from the coaches. We'll try to get some fun guests on here as well. But thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell as well. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Warner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.